Welcome to the Point. Perhaps some of the biggest news in this past week came from new rules from the CDC that say if you're fully vaccinated against COVID-19, you may take your mask off in most places. On Friday, I spoke with Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist about what the new guidelines mean to Michigan and the metrics that the governor had laid out regarding getting back to normal. What does that, though a promising sign, mean for the back to normal process? Because there are certain metrics set up, obviously certain incentives for reaching certain plateaus. One of those incentives was getting to 70% taking off the mask. Does that change that paradigm any?
We're taking a look at that. Obviously, this is new context, but I think we should frame what happened yesterday as really an unambiguously positive thing. It perhaps might be the biggest incentive for people to make the choice to get vaccinated, because we've been living in this reality. We've had to wear masks and be social distance for a year. We have this tool that works better than we could have ever imagined. These vaccines are so safe, they're so effective. They stop people or make it very difficult to transmit, get sick, go to the hospital, or pass away. So now you can get vaccinated, get fully inoculated, and then you can take your mask off. You can get back to doing the things you miss in the way that you miss them. That's encouraging. So we've updated our guidance to reflect that from the CDC. Let's take a look at my Back to Normal Challenge stuff as well. But what's important, if you get vaccinated, more stuff is available. More things are possible.
Stay tuned for more changes that could be coming to those state recommendations. In the meantime, this week, the Michigan legislature took up a major step in getting a budget put together for the 2022 fiscal year. Now comes the opportunity for the House and Senate to sit down and hammer out any differences that they have, still later with the governor as well. To talk more about that process, we begin with Republican Appropriations member Representative Mark Huizenga from Walker. Representative, the budget for the state of Michigan is an interesting animal in that it is complex, and it is, or will be, I suspect, bigger than ever before. Tell me where we are in the appropriations process in starting to get things going, because there are a lot of different levels. The governor's laid out her plan. The legislature is now working through that. You'll come up with individual budgets, and then I assume you go into the omnibus plan. But let's start with where we are today as we move into mid-May.
Sure. Well, thanks, Rick. The budget process actually begins, just like you said, early in the year. The governor provides her recommendations for what the budget should look like. Our various committees meet and we talk about what the budget should look like, what we think it should look like. Those then are brought to the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee may change some things. Once it's voted out of the Appropriations Committee, it goes to the House floor. That's where we are this week. It was basically all the budgets have been passed through the House floor this week. We finished up last night about 6:30 and worked late on Wednesday night as well.
Some of the budgets that we've seen coming out of the Senate, for example, have made some changes in how some departments would operate. For example, money would be allocated to the Secretary of State's office, but she would have to accept those office visits without having them scheduled, which is what she announced recently she would do, that only scheduled appointments. Some of these things are going to be non-starters with the governor. So what does that mean for this process?
Well, anytime we have a divided government, I would say that one side's going to push hard one way, then the other side has to push back. We always end up meeting somewhere in the middle. The governor's recommendations are always a starting point, and we have different ideas. For instance, this year, you've probably seen a number of the budgets actually include quarterly values. That does not include departments such as higher education, community colleges, or the school aid. Those budgets are all fully funded and actually see greater dollars than the governor recommended. As we've continued down the process of what COVID looks like, obviously a huge influx of dollars come from the federal government. We've applied those things where we think it's needed the most. But some of the budgets are quarterly. So instances like the Secretary of State, for instance, or other state departments, we think that makes sense. They should own that process and work with us as they continue to reopen. And it's a tool for us to work with them. It's not uncommon in business to do quarterly budgets, but this is a little bit unique for at least my experience in the House right now.
As you look at the number of dollars that have been flowing in from the federal government, what does that do with the budget process? Because you know the dollars that are there this year aren't going to be there next year, and there are a couple of different schools of thought about how you're going to deal with those.
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example. One of the things is that we know that revenues may not always be as predictable as we expect. In fact, last year we saw 3 different revenue estimating conferences, all with very wide and different experiences and what the number was going to look like. So we are in a time of uncertainty. So to that end, we actually put $102 million into the school aid stabilization fund. That's kind of think about it like the rainy days fund for schools, because if revenue is unpredictable and we have to do cuts someplace, we don't want to cut in schools. Their children are important, and we'll continue to fund that. We got $4.8 billion in the supplemental school aid fund that applies to schools to help them get back to school, help them with learning loss issues, provide additional dollars for summer school and after school training, and as well as just provide resources to help them as they reopen a very challenging time for any school district.
If you had to base your previous experience and put it up against this process, and I understand these are very unusual times. Last budget was very unusual. First budget was very unusual. How is this weighing out? Do you feel like the process is moving along? I mean, your end of the process is, but where does this hit a snag, or does it?
Well, Rick, this is my 3rd year in the House, and I would say the environment or the culture for our budgeting process has been unique each and every year. So I don't really have a consistent perspective. I do believe, however, that we worked very methodically. I worked very closely with our Chair Albert, to ensure that we can have a good budget process. And I think that, especially we see good bipartisan support on many of the budgets, and working bipartisanly is important. But most importantly, that we do these things for the stakeholders that are the most important. I think about especially kids. When we put $281 million towards a Great Start Readiness program, this helps 4-year-olds and those that are at greatest risk for educational failure. To give them the dollars and resources to help them be successful is really critical. We increased the per pupil funding greater than the governor expected to do. I chair the higher education and community college budget. We put more dollars than the governor recommended for community colleges, because right now we hear from employers that they need people to work, whether it's nurses, medical assistants, welders, or other things. There are a number of resources we put in there to make it so that those folks can be even more successful. Now, I radically changed the process for the way that the government, the community college and higher education budget works, but it's also a plan that I think is based strongly upon good data and good math.
There are going to be fundamental differences, and I appreciate the fact that the Republicans that control both the House and Senate have looked at this in, as you point out, in some parts, doing it quarter by quarter, looking about putting some of this federal money, deploying it in different ways at different times as we see what the COVID recovery looks like. But there is also another component to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the legislature has been seeking to find a voice over these past 14 or so months, and this perhaps is your best opportunity to do so, and the budget process is the one place where you really weigh in. Is there a component of that mixed into this?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's correct, but it's an unfortunate part of politics today. A year ago, we worked with the governor to provide additional dollars for COVID relief early on. She played by the rules, but she quickly pivoted about a year ago and said, look, I'm going to go this alone. It was really what we thought was unconstitutional. It goes back to 8th grade civics class when you think about the balance between the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch. When we've had our authority taken away, that goes against the grain of what every person should expect. When people elect me to represent them in Lansing, taking away that authority to represent them for the issues, that's not fair and that's not right. Now, the governor chose to pivot and move back again to DHS and say that they were responsible for the process. But this is the only tool we have left to ensure that we have a seat at the table, that we have a voice. And look, this isn't a heavy-handed process. We just want to make sure that we're represented and that we get things done the right way, that we can represent the people that we actually represent. It's in our title, representative.
Representative, a couple of quick last questions. There has been confusion, I think, on the part of some people about when a budget has to be done. After the first budget with this administration, which was untidy to say the least, there was an agreement made between the legislature and the governor that the legislature would have a budget to the governor by July 1st. Fact of that matter is that's just an agreement that the legislature made with the governor. Constitutionally, the budget has to be ready and in place on September 30th, and that July 1st date could get blown out if negotiations need to go further, right?
That's correct. And I think it's only prudent that we try to have the best budget as close to that July date as possible. There are a number of budgets that do not operate on the same fiscal year cycle as the state. So for instance, local governments, your cities, whether it's Grand Rapids, Walker, Granville, or Wyoming, those folks all rely on a budget number for their budget that starts on July 1. The same thing for schools. So, here it is that we're in the middle of May, and being able to say that we have budgets through the House, that's a pretty good start. And next step for us is the reconciliation process with the Senate. We'll get to work on that right away. And, I think that on the House side, we've done everything we can to get this thing processed as quickly as possible. Budgets are always a challenge in a negotiation. And so we'll have to see how things go on the governor's side now as she reconciles with what we have in there as well.
If you had to guess, is this done by July 1st, or will we still be talking about this in August and September?
Well, I would suspect that the House and the Senate would have theirs done and presented to the governor, but I think that there'll probably be a long drawn out process, unfortunately, for the entire process to be validated and to be signed off by the governor.
After the debacle with the budget in the first year of the new governor's term, both the legislative and executive branches agreed to having a spending plan to the governor by July 1st, though that is not binding. Even if lawmakers are able to get a budget to the governor before their summer break, it will likely be weeks or months before a final plan would be agreed to. We'll be back with the Democratic perspective from the other end of the Capitol next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Each year, one of the first priorities of the legislature is to start working on a budget. That is, after all, one of the major purposes of both bodies. We are just now at the point where the House and the Senate have come up with their plans, and the negotiations are really only just beginning. For a Democratic perspective, we talked with the Minority Vice Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Curtis Hertel Jr. from East Lansing. Senator, it has been a busy week. A lot of budget bills have been passed in both the upper chamber and the Senate, also down in the House. Certainly isn't the end of the process, though. Tell me about what it's looked like putting a budget together so far as the vice chairman, the Democratic leader on that budget, the Appropriations Committee.
This is an important part of the process. The governor lays out her priorities through her budget announcement, and I was proud to introduce the governor's budget. And that now the leaders of the House and the Senate get to put out their priorities. And in a perfect world, in a normal world, and what we can all hope will happen is that we all sit down and find a way to work together after that to put all those priorities together into a budget document. For me, the most important thing is to remember is that our job isn't to get wins for Republicans and Democrats. Our job is to get wins for Michigan's people. And there are some things that I agree with in these budgets, and some things I definitely don't. I think we are in an incredibly important time coming out of the pandemic. Michigan has a chance to surge forward, and we need to make sure that we're making strategic investments in people, in our kids, and in job training and all those things to make sure that Michigan comes out of the pandemic as well as it was handled during. This governor has saved thousands of lives here in Michigan. And now it's time to get our economy rolling again as we head back in to a post-COVID world.
When you look at a post-COVID world and you look at I would say unprecedented, you can correct me if I'm wrong, amount of federal funding coming into the state to help prop up those areas where COVID may have carved out the economy. On one hand, it looks like kind of an easy thing to do because this isn't about a lack of money necessarily. In fact, more money than many would have expected, but it's about trying to assign those priorities. And that makes it a little tricky because this is not money that's necessarily going to be there over the long haul, right?
No, that's absolutely true. But we also have challenges that aren't going to be there over the long haul, right? I mean, we know that the kids have experienced learning loss over the last year. So we should be making those strategic investments. We have a unique opportunity to invest in early education. A lot of parents have had to stay home for a long period of time, and now they're going to get back to work. And one of the things preventing them from getting back to work is the cost of childcare. So we can make important investments there. It's important that we come out of this pandemic in a way that helps roar Michigan forward. And we're in a unique spot in the sense that there's, one of the biggest challenges of the pandemic was that we lost a lot of manufacturing as a country. So we weren't producing a lot of the things and needed to scramble to get masks and disinfectant wipes and everything else from other countries. Michigan's a great place to build things. So if we can make these strategic investments, I think Michigan's in a great place moving forward because of our long-time history of manufacturing, for example. But it takes the strategic investments to make that happen. I want to make sure that the dollars are being spent in a way that's going to move Michigan forward. And that means we're investing in job training, we're investing in our kids, and we're investing in opportunities for Michiganders moving forward to be part of what a new economy looks like after COVID.
As you look at the budget process where we are now, there will be a reconciliation process between the House and the Senate. Both Democrats and Republicans will try to get priorities and they'll try to get some type of an agreement. What are the things that you look at from your position as the ranking Democrat on that committee that you will try to push for? Because you said, as with every budget, there are things you like and things you don't like. So obviously you're going to be trying to change some of those.
So some of the things that I think we're missing from what we passed the last few days. Investments in the Future for Frontliners program, awarding those that actually took the hardest hit during the pandemic and protected all of us in the middle of very, very difficult times. Michigan Reconnect, actually trying to get Michiganders ready for the new economy and getting people back and well-trained to do jobs that are available in the new economy. Early education, I think, is an incredibly important opportunity that we have, and I know the governor is working on things in that regard, and I hope we can make that a bipartisan agreement that early education it should be a foundation of what we do moving forward. And if we can get the highest quality early education, our state will have the highest quality results for our kids moving forward, and all of our education numbers will go up. The Double Up Food Bucks program was cut in this budget. I think that's an incredibly important thing that partners farmers with making sure that our poorest have access to quality foods. Part of the problem is that many of our poorest communities that we tell people, we wonder why these health disparities are there. There are grocery deserts. Their fresh foods aren't available to them. So the Double Up Food Bucks program is an incredibly important one that was not fully funded in this budget. First responder training grants was a cut that I wasn't happy to see. We said we have to do something about our growing teacher shortage. We need to find investments to get teachers, people that want to teach. We've lost so many teachers during this pandemic. And you look at our colleges around the state, and there aren't people going into the teaching profession because we've in many ways deprofessionalized the profession. And kids are going to graduate with $50,000 worth of debt. And the first 5 years are not going to make anywhere near 50 grand a year to pay for that debt. So we have to make investments there. So again, but that's because why we have a beginning of the process. The governor put a lot of these priorities in her budget. Some of them aren't in the Republicans' budgets that were passed this week. But that's why we should all get in a room and work together to solve these things. I've never seen in Lansing one party solve big problems. It just doesn't work that way. It works when we all sit down, we work together, and we find a way to listen to each other and find each other's priorities and get big things done. And that's my job, and that's I think the most important role of the Senate.
Is there something else afoot here? I get it that there is a budget that needs to be done. I get it that there are real pandemic issues that need to be addressed and that there may be money to do that, particularly with that federal money. But over the course of the past 14 months, the Republicans in the legislature have repeatedly said that they felt like they were being shut out, that they didn't have a voice, that the governor wasn't listening to them. Is part of this budget process an effort to have their voice in some of this pandemic response?
Yeah, listen, I'm not sure what their feelings are. They certainly have expressed some frustration that, I don't know if the legislative process is always the best way to handle a global pandemic. Unfortunately, there were opportunities for us to pass a mask mandate or codify some of what the governor was doing. The legislature hasn't done any of that. So, we can whine about it or we can do something. So I guess I'm not exactly fully in agreement with them that they haven't been part of something. They've had plenty of opportunities to be. That being said, at some point we're all adults and we have a job to do, and the pandemic is going to end pretty soon. I mean, I hope for everyone's sake that everyone feels very strongly that the pandemic's going to end, and we got to talk about how we're going to move our way out of it. The Michigan people, again, don't care about whether Republicans or Democrats are getting their say. It doesn't matter to people. What matters to them. Sometimes I think we got to worry less about our house and worry more about their house. Worry about their kitchen table, and worry about what's happening to their families. Listen, as somebody who's served in the minority my entire time, trust me, I would like it if people would listen to me more often. There are a lot of times I'm yelling on the floor of the Senate trying to get listened to, and that's frustrating sometimes. But I'm never going to let that stand in the way of getting the job done for the Michigan people. And I would hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would feel the same way. It's time to put partisan politics aside, put all the hurt feelings aside, and get to work on what we're actually paid to do, which is get things done for people in Michigan.
And Senator, quickly before we go, and I'm asking for your best estimate, you've done this budget process before, agreement between the House and Senate and Governor after the first year, which was a tough budget, that everybody tried to get everything done by July 1st and get it to the governor. Are we on track to do that, understanding that that's not a hard, fast date, because certainly you've got till the end of September, but is the budget process moving along to be at least that far along on July 1st?
I feel very strongly that it should happen. Obviously, if you look at the House and the House budgets and the Senate budgets, they're pretty far apart too. So it's going to take a lot of negotiations. But my feeling is we should get in a room, lock the door, nobody feed us, and let us work throughout the night until we actually can get it done. I think that the time makes everything more difficult, not easier. So it's not going to be any easier to pass a budget in July. I think if we blow past the deadline, it just means that we won't be doing it for months. Another thing I'd say is there's never been a time in Michigan history where we had too much money and couldn't find a way to spend it. So we've had shutdowns plenty of times when there had to be cuts. This is an opportunity that Michigan has, and we need to make those investments now. And the other thing I'd remind you, Rick, we still have federal money that we have to get out the door. There is federal money that is meant to help us get out of this pandemic, to help people recover, to help those that were economically hurt, and to make sure that we get out of this pandemic as well off as we can for Michigan's people, and that we're still sitting on those dollars. So that's the thing that's most important to me too, is that these aren't Michigan legislature dollars. They're not the governor's dollars. They're dollars that are our federal dollars that we sent to DC that were sent back to us to actually do something with. It's time to get those dollars out the door, and it's time for all of us to commit ourselves to getting out of this pandemic with a healthy Michigan. We're going to have a gubernatorial election next year. It's going to be, I'm sure that there's plenty of time for us to fight. There's plenty of time for us to throw bombs. There's plenty of time for us to worry about politics. This year should not be that. This year, we should spend some time, sit down, and figure out how to best get ourselves out of this pandemic and the best way to help Michigan's people.
The budget deadline is midnight, September 30th. The sooner a budget is completed for agencies and departments planning for the year ahead, the better. Back with the final thought next. To the point. The legislature now has to come to some conclusion on the budgets before they go to the governor, and the negotiations between the two branches could go into late summer or early fall. We'll be watching and keep you updated. We'll see you next week right here. To the point.